परिच्छन्न इव अज्ञानात् तन्नाशे सति केवलम् स्वयं प्रकाशते ह्यात्मा मेघापायेन अशुमानिव. The soul appears to be finite because of ignorance. When ignorance is destroyed, the self, which does not admit any multiplicity, truly reveals itself by itself, like the sun when the clouds pass away. In the previous verse, we learnt that the ever-present Atman cannot be known through actions, but by knowledge alone. In this verse, Shankara is again explaining the eternal nature of Atman. Parichanna appears to be finite. The identification of human being with one's body, mind or intellect causes one to feel limited or restrained. The following three aspects may clarify this limitation, as though limited in space. The pure self is defined to be sarvavyapi or omnipresent. Due to the identity with the body, it is explained as alpavyapi, that is limited in space. What does this mean? We are verily divine self, and like divinity or the divine Lord is present everywhere, as self, we are not limited by any space, and we and divinity are one. However, when we ignore, when we forget our real identity as Divya Atman, we think we are our body. Then the limitation of space comes, as our body is definitely limited by space. When we occupy, our body occupies one part of the space, it cannot be in the other part of the space, next door. Second, limited by time. First was Desha, second is Kala. The pure self is eternal or Nitya, but we do not experience this as our very nature, because we are limited in time, as our limited body is definitely limited in its existence by time. The body exists in a particular limited space at a particular point of time. Time is a mental concept superimposed on the self, and hence we feel we are anitya and not nitya. We are oppressed by the idea that we have a temporary existence. And of course, limited by body. This is the first limitation. That is why we feel we are limited by space or we are limited by time. It is our body which is limited by space or limited by time. Limitation in body is also called vastu, limited by object. The pure self is Sarva Atman. It is not limited to one object. Because of our identity with our body, we feel limited and threatened by all other bodies or objects around us, as we see them as not us. Thus, we experience the severe limitation of being only me and not the Sarva Atman. Thus, ignorance has robbed us of knowing ourselves as we are. To restore us to our original nature or our true divine nature, we need to have knowledge of whom we are. Then only our ignorance will get destroyed. Due to the ignorance about the self is perceived by the mind as finite, non-eternal, etc. When the limitations are recognized and negated, we get closer to our pure or kevala sthiti, beyond the limitations. Also, we get the awareness or we get the knowledge that we are not limited by the three types of Bheda limitation which has already been given to you many times. Swagata, Sajyatya, Vijatya. Swagata, difference within the same species. Sajatya, within the same species of this thing, no differences are seen between different trees. Sajatya Bheda is within the same species, seeing differences between one type and the other type. And getting beyond this limitation is getting beyond the limitation of several objects within the same species. Vijatya, between different species, like between man and animal. Of course, we see this difference, but when we have understood ourselves as space, as self, and everything else not limited by object, every object is space as self, then there can be no difference between two different species either. When at each of these levels we go to the common factor, then the limitedness associated at that level disappears. At the level of self or consciousness, every object becomes limitless. As we go beyond the form of the object and see only the common consciousness, here seeing means experiencing or existing as. In this manner, by deep meditation and inquiry, nididhyasana, we can transcend our limitations. When the ignorance causing all these limitations is removed by the knowledge, then all that ever remains is the non-dual self or Atman alone. What example illustrates this limitation we feel? The example in this verse is of clouds shielding the direct rays of the sun. The sun is self-luminous. We need not show a light on the sun to see it. And if clouds are shielding it, nothing needs to be done to the sun to get its rays again. Just the clouds need to disperse by a strong wind. This wind is the knowledge. Once they have moved away, the direct rays of sun are seen. By removal of ignorance, by the wind of knowledge, this is the whole sadhana to the point of total chitta shuddhi or chitta ekagrata. The first offshoot of ignorance is identification with the limitations, technically called upadhis. From that arises the feeling of being limited. From that arises discontent or the feeling of incompleteness. And from that arises desire for fulfilling our incompleteness. With the manifestation of desire, the first step taken to engage with the external objects. This step is taken to fulfill the desire. Thus begins the avidya kama karma. Thus begins the vast network of actions by which ignorance becomes more and more deep-rooted in us. In the simile used here in this verse, this process is like the cloud building up bigger and bigger, getting darker and darker, and concealing the sun more and more. In this example, the sun stands for the self, which is self-effulgent and not in need of anything to enable it to be known. Ignorance is the dark cloud that is shielding the sunlight, as we saw before. For driving away the clouds, just by directing a small part of air from our mouth and gesturing like that, doing this will not suffice. The wind has to blow high up when where the cloud is situated. That in the similar way, the knowledge of Brahman, technically called Brahmakara Vritti, must be blown deep in the silence of meditation. Then it can be effective in driving off ignorance. The sun is ever present, luminous, and shines forth always. Only that the clouds have to be removed. It was never affected, the sun was never affected by the passing clouds. Question. Acharya, I agree with you on whatever you have taught today, but in reality, when I am walking, acting, sitting, thinking, all the limitations told by you are very much there within me. I am not able to feel that I am beyond these limitations of body, space, time, objects, etc. And I am verily that consciousness. Kindly guide me. Answer. My child, in your question itself, the answer is there. What did you say? I am not able to feel that I am beyond the time-space object. That is what you said. Yes, Master. So, you feel that you are bound by time-space object. Now focus on one thing. Who is that? Who in you is the one or is the thing who feels that you are bound by time, space, etc.? Even when you think so, you, the consciousness, is separate from all these limitations which you have superimposed upon yourself. It is not the consciousness which thinks that you are limited by Deshakala Vastu. It is your mind which conveys to you that you are limited by time-space object. It is a superimposition of your mind on you, the consciousness, and this superimposition is exactly the cloud shielding the sun. If at all you are actually all these limitations, then tell me one thing. Where are all these superimpositions in your Shushupti, in your deep sleep? There is neither limitation of body, object, nor of space, nor of time. The limitation of body, mind, intellect itself is not there in deep sleep. Then it itself is sufficient to prove to you that these limitations in effect do not exist at all. In the Mandukya Karika, in the second chapter, a verse says thus: Tattvam adhyatmikam drishtva tattvam drishtva tu bahyata tatvibhutastadharama tatvada prachyuto bhavet. Having known the truth regarding what exists internally, as well as the truth regarding what exists externally, one becomes one with the reality, Tattvam, derives his bliss from that essence, and he never deviates from that real essence. See, Gaudapada Acharya has not used the name Brahman or Atman, because once you use the expression Brahman, one may see that Brahman to be away from them. He has just used your true essence, Tattvam, 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 Tattvam. The truth regarding external objects such as the earth, etc., and the truth regarding internal objects characterized by body, etc., is that these are all unreal, as a snake seen in the rope, or object seen in the dream or in magic. There are Shrutis verses which say modification being only a name arising from speech, etc. There is no modification as such. Also, Shrutis declare Atman is both within and without, birthless, causeless, having no within or without, entire, all-pervading, like the Akasha, subtle, unchanging, without attributes, without action. That is truth, that is Atman, and that thou art, Tattvamasi. Knowing it to be such from the point of view of truth, one becomes one merged and with the truth and exists as that truth Tattvam, and derives the bliss Ananda from his very existence, which is that Tattvam. But a person ignorant of truth takes the mind to be the self and believes the Atman to be active like the mind and becomes active. He thus thinks his self to be identified with the body, etc., and deviated from Atman, and says, "Oh, I am now fallen from the knowledge of self." When his mind is concentrated, he sometimes thinks that he is happy and one with the self. Then he declares for a limited time, "Oh, I am now with the essence of truth." Whereas the knower of the self never makes such statement, as Atman is ever one and changeless. And as it is impossible for Atman to deviate from its own nature. The consciousness that I am, that essence, I am Brahman, never leaves him. In other words, he never loses the consciousness regarding the essence of the self. So this Karika verse says, seeing that reality within and seeing that reality outside, you exist as that reality Tattvam, and you experience bliss, peace in that reality Tattvam, and you can never slip away from that reality Tattvam. One feels sometimes that one has slipped away from that reality and says, "I am not at peace, I am agitated, etc., etc." It was the mind that was peaceful a while ago, and it is the mind that is agitated or disturbed now. But observe one thing. Who in you was observing that serenity of mind, and who in you is now witnessing the disturbance in the mind? It is you. the pure witness consciousness. And you as that consciousness can never slip away from this real tattvam ever. Water is the same, whether the river, ocean is existing as Nishchalam without any ripples, or it is undergoing a storm, a turbulent storm. In both cases, the apparent changeless or the apparent turbulence is all outside, external, appearing to be parichinna, it appearing to be, whereas the water in itself is always changeless. When we have a pure Ganges in one small pot and where we have dirty smelling substance in the other pot, the space within the two pots never gets affected by the content of the pot. Thus, Shankara here explains that it is only because of ignorance that self appears to be finite. When the ignorance is destroyed, the self reveals itself like the sun when the clouds are removed. Brahman is never separate from you. It is not something to be acquired. That is why the Karika verse, as we said, it is not referring to Brahman, it is referring to Tattvam. Tattvam, essence. You can never mentally think that your essence can be separate from you. The cloud in your case is not something apart from you, which is separating you from your real nature, the sun. The cloud is your misapprehension, your ignorance, and it is unreal. On removal of the cloud, the real sunshine, you, pure consciousness, shines in all its pristine glory, in all its splendor. Right? Thus, Shankara beautifully through vivid analogies which we can easily relate to is explaining to us the nature, real nature of our being, the self, the Atman. Through this treatise, Atma Bodha. Gaudapada, through this Karika verse, has categorically explained to us that the essence, as that essence can never be separate from you. And experiencing that same essence within and without, one experiences the bliss of that same essence. And that essence can never leave oneself, never can be separate from one. And in reality, when one really exists as that essence, not for a day or a month or a year, but eternally, when one abides in that self, actually, really, there is no creation for him, which leads to the Ajatavada of Gaudapadacharya. Hari Om Tat Sat.